Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Homeland, the series of interviews where we meet fascinating people in the land of Israel, people who are passionate about Israel, to try and learn and understand all things connected with Israel, which particularly resonates with everyone right now. We're going to talk about Israel. We're going to try and understand lots of aspects of Israel, which is multifaceted. But for today, we are so honored to be meeting with the one and only Richard Pater. Richard is the CEO of BICOM, and has many years' experience working with government officials, diplomats, and journalists, and briefing British audiences on Israeli politics and security issues. And right now, we are all thirsty to understand what's going on the ground. So, Richard, if you could just tell us all a little bit, first of all, how are you, and what has your week been like?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's an honour to be with you today. This week has been very difficult. I mean, it started off actually on Sunday night. I gave a briefing about the election, and I was quietly, I would say, cautiously optimistic that we were about to form a new government. And talking about one of the kind of most important aspects of this new government was the new legitimization of the Israeli Arab parties that could even be joining this new government, and kind of talking about how fascinating it is to have a potential prime minister, Naftali Bennett, who's from the Israeli right, in dialogue and in negotiations to form a government with RAM, the Islamic Party. And fast forward 4 days later, nothing really, unfortunately, seems further apart. I wouldn't say it's over. They still have until June the 2nd to form a government, but right now, because of the conflict, it's looking pretty bleak. Monday was the start of the conflict, and as I live here in Jerusalem, I had this slightly surreal and unpleasant experience having to usher my young children down into the bomb shelter as rockets were coming in on Jerusalem for the first time in several years. And since then, unfortunately, the situation has just further deteriorated, both in the terms of the incoming rockets and the intensity of the barrage, and also kind of most recently, which I alluded to, kind of this conflict and clashing between the publics within Israeli society, between some extremists, both Jews and Arabs, that hopefully we'll see the end of, but it kind of has caused a lot of distress here over the last couple of nights.
So sorry to hear that. And I know for me personally, I have family in Israel, a lot of friends in Israel, and seeing the images on social media of the distress being caused is horrendous to see. And our hearts go out to you, and we are with you here in the British community. I guess for me, really, what I would like to try and get to understand is as follows. I've had a lot of phone calls this week from young people, students, young professionals asking me, Rabbi, what's going on in Israel? You know, why are they treating the Palestinians this way? What happened at Sheikh Jarrah? What's going on? And I guess people are confused, especially because what they see in the media and on social media can sometimes be very much a one-sided narrative against Israel, and demonizing Israel. And I think really I would love you, as the CEO of BICOM, where your entire work is to focus on trying to improve these relationships, particularly between Britain and Israel, is to give a perspective and help everyone understand a little bit better some of the context and background in the few minutes we have together.
Sure. Well, I will try. I will try to do that. I mean, the genesis of this current crisis we're in. I think the blame is clearly laid on Hamas, and the conflict started as an internal Palestinian dispute. This is between kind of the two factions that have been rivals for over a decade: Fatah in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. And it was actually by a miscalculation, badly played. He made two mistakes. Abu Mazen, the head of Fatah, calling the election when it was the politics was so dysfunctional, and then even worse, cancelling them. And it's the cancellation of that election which really triggered this anger and frustration amongst Hamas, because they thought there was a moment there where there would be elections after 15 years, that they would be able to kind of legitimately, in their eyes, take control of the full Palestinian area. And when this was denied them, they've kind of gone back to form and to the most familiar course of behavior that they know, which is unfortunately, as a terrorist organization, to launch attacks on Israelis. We saw this already in the lead up. I mean, this kind of was a perfect storm during the time of Ramadan, where tension is already exacerbated. I think there is a disconnect in Islam when they see Israel power and sovereignty over control of their holy areas, the Temple Mount. Even though back in '67 Israel gave it back to the Waqf, and we should understand that it's the Islamic Council that are in charge and control there. Obviously, that's in the context of overall Israeli sovereignty, and that's difficult sometimes for them to handle. But this was all kind of inspired, led, premeditated. The violence that we saw in Jerusalem by Hamas, we saw Hamas flags on the Temple Mount, I think for the first time I can recall, and really stoking it. We saw a couple of incidents in the West Bank as well, drive-by shootings. Sadly, a 19-year-old young man died as a result of the wounds, and so all of these were kind of quite irregular behaviour. We've seen stabbing attacks and rammings in the past, but using live weapons, guns was also a step up. And now, as we kind of know with hindsight, we are where we are with this huge barrage of rocket attacks. So I kind of push back gently, because I think some of the international community is well-meaning when they call for both sides to desist and kind of to stop the violence. We all want the violence to stop, but it's quite clear that were Hamas to stop firing the rockets, Israel would immediately cease their operations there. And the second kind of inequality in terms of the reference of both sides is that whilst Hamas are firing deliberately at civilian areas, Israel and the IDF are purely targeted at the terrorist infrastructure or the terrorists themselves, and have no interest in harming the regular Palestinians. So this is where we are. This is kind of where it's taken us to, and it's obviously causing distress to all sides.
Very challenging and horrendous to hear and to see and to learn about. But it's an amazing thing, because just a week ago, Israel was kind of like the golden boy of the world, done incredibly well with vaccinations. And here in the UK, we had the green travel list. Israel was at the top of that list, and people were really contemplating traveling there for the summer. Unfortunately, I think that very much seems off the cards for most people, not wanting to go anywhere near a war zone right now. Perhaps we could talk about something a little bit more positive about the vaccinations and the success of that. And many people are challenged with, how was that vaccination shared? Was it shared fairly amongst the Palestinians and the Israelis? Give us a little bit of context around that subject as well. That would be great.
Sure. So I think Prime Minister Netanyahu deserves quite a large degree of the credit for being so tenacious with insisting that Israel was to get the Pfizer vaccine so early. I also think it wasn't just about the Prime Minister's influence. I think that the Pfizer came to realize that the size of the country and the makeup of its health system allows for such an efficient and equitable distribution of the vaccines that made it a very useful kind of live test case to prove that it works in the real world. I mean, let's be clear that similar to the UK, I think it was basically the only criteria in terms of the priorities of the vaccine was age. And after the over 65s all had their jabs, and again, I should stress this is the same for Jews and Arabs. Everyone is treated equally within the medical system, and very soon it was because of the efficiency of the medical setup that everyone here has. You have to opt into one of the health baskets that provide your a healthcare provider. And once you go to that, then it's all done digitally, and you get your appointment, and everyone basically, every adult over the age of 16 pretty much has been eligible, and the vast majority have had their had their vaccine. Sorry. Just to clarify, because there was some controversial aspect of why the Palestinians weren't eligible to get the same vaccine, and that's very simple, because they're not Israeli citizens. And according to the treaty that was signed from 1993 under the Oslo Accords, it specifically says that the Palestinian Authority themselves are responsible to vaccinate their own population. And just like lots of other countries in the developing world in Africa and Asia that still haven't got their vaccine. So the Palestinians were further down on the pecking order. Nevertheless, there is an understanding here, at least from some, that it's in Israel's interest also to vaccinate the Palestinians as quick as possible. And so therefore they extended the courtesy at least to the 100,000 or so Palestinian workers that come into Israel on a regular basis, and they were also vaccinated. And there was some goodwill measure at the time also given to some of the other healthcare workers, etc., others. But that's where we are, and the rate of the coronavirus and the spread of the infection right now is almost completely gone. We're almost, aside from the conflict issue, which is maybe keeping people indoors, with the country itself post-corona has almost completely opened up.
Wow, thank you so much for that context. I guess if you could tell us a little bit about BICOM and the work that you're involved with generally, that would be really fascinating to hear just a little bit about that and the incredible stuff that you guys have been doing, I think, since 2002.
Sure. So BICOM, as you said, I mean, BICOM is a research and communications organization. We have two. We have those are the two arms, if you like, of what we do. And in terms of on the research aspect, we put out a morning briefing 3 times a week, which anyone is welcome to sign up for. It's free at bicom.org.uk, of which we kind of take the story of the day and try and put it in with some analysis and some context to understand from abroad. We then put out on an ad hoc basis longer form analysis. The analysis we cover is basically on 4 areas: domestic Israeli politics and society, Israel's relationship with the Palestinians, Israel's regional issues, mostly vis-a-vis Iran and the Syrian conflict. And then fourthly is kind of a bias that we have to the UK, that we focus on the strength of the bilateral relationship between Britain and Israel. So that's kind of the research. And then the communication side is engagement with the UK media. They're our primary audience, but other kind of UK elites, opinion formers and decision makers are also within our bandwidth. Pre-corona, one of the kind of the flagship aspects of our program was to bring small delegations of elite journalists, senior journalists, policy advisors, etc., to Israel, because we believe there is no better way to understand the complexities and realities of Israel without coming to visit themselves. Obviously, we haven't been able to do that for the last year. So like lots of other organizations, we pivoted to do it on Zoom as well. So we host a variety of kind of regular Zoom interactions. We also, not dissimilar to this, also record a weekly podcast where we engage with Israeli experts and analysts and basically provide material in the English language, which isn't otherwise accessible, to present it to our audience. And the vast majority of that material we also publish on our website, that any of you or your audience who are interested in learning more about Israel are very welcome to visit.
That's fantastic. And I think let's end on a high, because, you know, we've got to be optimistic. We've got to be positive. Please God, this conflict will end and we will have long-term peace in the Middle East. But tell us, what's the most exciting thing happening in Israel outside of all the fighting and terror and war and pandemic? Tell us something exciting about the tech industry or you know, just something completely different, which will wow our listeners.
For the wow factor, I mean, sorry to be slightly boring and stay on the geopolitical scene. I am the most excited over the last few months about the Abraham Accords and about the potential that has for this country. I've been privileged already to engage and meet new friends from Bahrain and the Emirates, and also Saudi Arabia, by the way. It was heartwarming that during the rocket barrage, I was getting text messages from people in the Gulf and Saudi Arabia kind of saying that they were with us, that they supported Israel, and that that their heart was with us. That was kind of a fascinating insight, that the connections that we're building are real and meaningful, and we very much hope to kind of one day to bring the Palestinians into that orbit. And I'll end just with one other thought, that I was invited 2 nights ago to a group of friends, Muslim friends, who were having an iftar fast-breaking dinner. And also within the context of everything that was going on out of Gaza, it was even more important to show there and be there as a Zionist Jew, to identify and kind of to reciprocate the friendship of which was being shown towards me. And at this evening, there were Jews and Muslims and Christians. They had a separate table set up for the Jews that wanted to keep kashrut. And kind of there was an element of kind of taking food over to each other's tables to kind of try and entice people into trying the kosher food, and that was less successful on both ways. But the general spirit of Jerusalemites, that beyond the conflict and everything that we've gone through this week, I think the spirit of the Jerusalemites kind of is sustained, that understands we're in this together, that dialogue and peace is the answer. We are all of the Abrahamic faiths and kind of can all trace back to Avram Avinu as a commonality between us all. And I hope that is the spirit that takes us forward as well.
Amen to that, please God, absolutely. Well, Richard Pater, thank you so much. I'd just like to invite our audience who may be watching this to feel free to comment below, ask questions below. I will, of course, tag you, Richard, and BICOM, and we can try and create a dialogue to respectfully try and open this and help understand here in Britain how we can support and help Israel try and achieve that long-lasting peace. But thank you so much, Richard.
It's an absolute pleasure.
All the best.